Dolan, Transparency International. Antoine Deltour's trial started last week. What would you like to see the EU doing to protect whistleblowers?
Well, first, it should be very clear that what Antoine Deltour was a public service. What he did was expose tax avoidance on an industrial scale in Luxembourg, and the fact that the revenues of member states all around Europe were being drained by these tax practices. So the European Commission, the EU, member states should all be very clear that it was in the public interest what Antoine Deltour did. Now, I think the other thing that the EU can do is try and make sure that what Antoine Deltour is suffering at the moment, prosecution, possible imprisonment and a fine, but that doesn't happen to anybody else in the future who makes this information public. So they should put in place minimum standards of protection for whistleblowers like Antoine who do what they did in the public interest.
Transparency International, you asked PricewaterhouseCoopers, the people who are bringing this case forward in the Luxembourg court, to withdraw their accusations. What would you like to see any sanctions on companies who do not respect the public value that whistleblowers bring?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the legislation is in place that requires companies to put in place not only the channels for whistleblowers to report wrongdoing, but also the protections for whistleblowers so that they're protected against unfair dismissal and prosecution. So the legal situation should be very clear so the companies don't have the wriggle room to do the kind of things that PricewaterhouseCoopers has done. It's not a case of sanctions as such, it's better legislation.
And Transparency International, you've looked at the situation in different countries across Europe. Is there best practice out there?
Well, it's good practice. So no legislation is perfect, but what we have in the UK, I think, is recognised as some of the best legislation in the world, and it has helped and protected whistleblowers in the last 20 years. We've recently seen in Ireland a piece of legislation that's modelled on the UK, and one of the main consequences of that is actually since the legislation has been in place, it's a clear, comprehensive piece of legislation. Our organisation in Ireland has seen the number of whistleblowers come forward increase by 2.5 times. So nearly 240% more whistleblowers have come forward because they recognise that they now have the rights and they have the protections under law.
The Green Party put forward a directive today, it's a proposal on the scope of whistleblowing and who should bear the burden of proof, among other issues that were raised in the directive. Are you happy with the directive as it's currently drafted, and do you think there will be wider support across the Parliament for this initiative?
Well, we have to be clear that the legislation is a minimum standard, so and that's because of the choice of the legal basis in the treaties for that. But that legal minimum will actually be an improvement on the situation in many countries, for example in Spain and Portugal and Greece, where we have hardly any or nothing at all in terms of protections. So it'll improve the situation on the ground. One could nitpick about this or that aspect of the legislation, but there's no question that it will be an improvement on what we've got.
What are the main actions you would like to see out there to defend whistleblowers?
Well, I think that one of the main things that whistleblowers need is they need advice and support. Transparency International has a number of advice centres for whistleblowers in 12 EU countries. There are centres where people can walk in and off the street and present their issues or claims and be dealt with sympathetically and get the support that they need. I think that's sometimes overlooked. Of course, the legal protections are necessary. That's the minimum. But sometimes people just need to feel that they're being listened to and what they are saying is being acted on. So that is something that, of course, governments could do as well. They could provide funding for these kind of centres, or indeed the governments can set them up themselves, as long as, of course, they are truly independent.